They crossed a line they thought no one would notice. They acted with cruelty so shameless, so deliberate, that it poisoned the air around them. And now the sickness of their act is no longer a secret. People see it. The outrage burns in whispers, in conversations behind doors, in eyes that refuse to look at them the same way again. What they did to you was not an accident, not a moment of weakness, but a decision. And when cruelty is a decision, it carries consequences heavier than they imagined. They underestimated how fast truth spreads once people catch its scent. They thought they could bury it. But outrage does not stay buried. Outrage rises, and it rises louder every time their name is mentioned. You endured their attacks in silence, and for a time, it looked like they had the upper hand. They mocked, they skimmed. They stripped away dignity with the glee of people convinced they would never face consequences. Yet here you stand, and here they fall. Because when people finally saw what they had done, the anger shifted. The weight of disgust is now theirs to carry. The outrage does not only speak to the act itself, it speaks to the arrogance of believing they could harm you and walk away untouched. That arrogance has collapsed. Now their own cruelty has shackled them, and every move they make only drags the chains louder across the floor. The psychology is revealing. Outrage in groups is never just about sympathy. It's about reflection. People look at what was done to you and think about how easily it could have been them. That recognition fuels the fire. It's not just that people are angry at the cruelty. They are angry at the reminder of their own vulnerability. What was done to you disgusts them because it shows how far some will go for control, for envy, for destruction. And by standing, by surviving, you became a mirror for everyone else's hidden fears. That mirror is why the outrage grows. They are not only defending you, they are defending themselves. You must not forget this. The outrage of others is not your foundation. It is confirmation. People are furious now because truth has been revealed, but your strength was forged long before the outrage appeared. You carried yourself through nights without applause, through battles fought in silence, through storms no one else bothered to shelter you from. Their anger now is late, valuable, but late, and you must treat it as such. Accept their support, but never depend on it, because the same crowd that cheers for you today can be swayed tomorrow. Your survival has always been your own. Their outrage is simply a weapon you can now wield against those who tried to bury you. What they did was sickening, but what it revealed is priceless. It revealed that you cannot be broken by cruelty, only clarified by it. They tried to make you smaller, but they only made their own ugliness larger. And now, people cannot unsee it. Outrage spreads like fire through dry grass, and once it catches, it devours everything in its path. Their reputation is tinder. Their alliances are tinder. Their power is tender. They are burning, not because you struck the match, but because they drenched themselves in lies and thought no flame would ever touch them. That is the irony of their downfall. You didn't have to retaliate. Their cruelty provided all the fuel. You should remember that disgust is more permanent than sympathy. People forget kindness quickly, but they remember what made their stomach turn. The world may forgive mistakes, but it does not forgive the sickening, deliberate attempt to harm someone who stood innocent. That memory lingers. That disgust sticks. And no matter how much they try to rebuild, no matter how many words they spin, the shadow of their cruelty will follow them. That is the curse they earned. The outrage is not temporary noise. It is a stain that will not wash away. Your role now is not to dwell on the sickness of what they did, but to use it as fuel. Outrage has shifted the stage, and the spotlight is on them. Their downfall is already written. You must not waste your energy joining the chorus of disgust. Let the crowd handle that. You focus on building. You focus on rising. Because the higher you climb, the more humiliating their cruelty looks in hindsight. Every success you achieve is a louder verdict against them than any words of outrage could deliver. They wanted to destroy you, but you are the proof that destruction failed. And nothing outrages the world more than failed cruelty. They will scramble now. They will try to explain, try to deny, try to twist the narrative. But outrage is deaf to excuses. Once people see sickness clearly, they cannot unsee it. And every excuse will sound like another admission of guilt. You don't need to fight them anymore. Their words are chains, their defense a coffin. Let them sink in it, because the truth has already chosen its side, and the outrage of others is only tightening the grip. They are learning what you always knew. Actions cannot be hidden forever. And when cruelty surfaces, it drags reputations under with it. So let this be your reminder. The sickening thing they did is no longer your burden to carry. It belongs to them now. Their shame, their disgust, their loss, it is all theirs. You don't rise by holding on to what they did. You rise by walking into the clarity it gave you. They tried to strip you of dignity, but you wear it sharper now. They tried to bury you in silence, but the crowd is roaring for you now. And whether the outrage fades or stays, your strength will remain, because their cruelty only proved what you had already built. You cannot be undone by the sickness of others. You endure, you grow, you rise. Some betrayals don't just sting in the moment. They alter the very structure of how you view the world. Trust is built on repetition, on consistency, on the belief that what someone shows you is who they really are. But when someone close chooses cruelty over loyalty, the fracture is not limited to the bond you shared. It rewires the way your mind processes every connection after it. You stop hearing promises the same way. You stop accepting smiles at face value. Even kindness becomes filtered through suspicion. This is what makes some acts so devastating. They don't simply hurt you, they recalibrate you. They force you into a new reality where trust is no longer a default, but a currency that must be earned with proof. You learned this the hard way. They walked into your life carrying the mask of loyalty, speaking with conviction, presenting themselves as steady ground. And you believed them. You weren't naive, you were human. Trust is not weakness, it is the glue that makes life livable. But when they tore that trust apart, they didn't just break one bond, they poisoned the soil you grew it in. Suddenly, you found yourself questioning people who never harmed you, second-guessing intentions that may have been pure. That is the aftermath of deep cruelty. It rewrites the definition of trust until even innocence looks guilty. Their single act reshaped the lens through which you now see the entire world. The psychology is brutal. Your brain is wired to protect you from repeated pain. Once betrayal enters, your mind catalogs it as survival data. Every new face, every new promise, every new connection gets measured against the betrayal. It's not paranoia, it's self-defense. They may call you closed off now, they may accuse you of being cold, but they don't understand the scars left by an act that rewrote your foundation. You don't shut people out because you hate them. You shut people out because you refuse to ever be blindsided again. That change is not temporary. It lingers. Because trust, once shattered at its core, does not grow back the same way. You must accept that some acts take away the luxury of innocence. Before you trusted by default, you extended good faith until proven otherwise. After, the order reversed. People must now prove themselves worthy before you let them near. This shift may feel heavy, even cynical, but it is also armor. Cruelty that rewrites trust does not leave you powerless. It leaves you sharper. You now see patterns sooner. You notice inconsistencies faster. You catch the lies before they bloom. That is the gift hidden inside the wound. They broke something fragile, yes, but they also awakened something indestructible. Your vision sharpened in pain, and that sharpened vision now guards you better than blind trust ever did. They will never admit the scale of what they did to you. To them, it was just a decision, just a betrayal, just another selfish move. But to you, it was structural damage. It altered the architecture of your mind. Trust used to be a house with open doors. Now it is a fortress with gates and guards. And while they may try to label you as hardened, the truth is you are simply awake. They taught you that cruelty often comes dressed as care. That betrayal often wears the smile of loyalty. You learn to test the weight of words, not just their sound. And in that test, you built a new definition of trust, one where proof outweighs promises. You must not hate yourself for the shift. Many fall into that trap. They mourn the innocence they lost. They long for the days when trust came easily. But longing for innocence after betrayal is longing for blindness. You were not meant to remain blind forever. You were meant to see, to discern, to protect your soul with sharper vision. Cruelty rewrote your trust, yes, but in that rewrite lies strength. You are no longer easy prey. You are no longer a simple target. You've become someone who carries awareness as a weapon. And though it may feel heavy, it also keeps you untouchable. The danger lies not in the shift, but in refusing to use it wisely. Some who experience betrayal build walls so high they shut out everything, even love, even opportunity. But the lesson is not to stop trusting. The lesson is to refine trust. You don't give it cheaply anymore. You don't let words seduce you without action. You don't mistake presence for loyalty. And by holding trust to higher standards, you actually build deeper, stronger connections. Cruelty destroyed your old framework, but you are the architect of the new one. And this time, the walls will not crumble so easily. Notice how they fear your new clarity. They may call you cynical, bitter, or distant. But what they really fear is that you now see through them. They thrived when you trusted blindly. They thrived when your innocence gave them access. Now, with your sharpened awareness, they know they cannot manipulate you again. That is why they speak against your transformation. It's not that you've lost yourself. It's that you found a version of yourself they can no longer exploit. That is the hidden revenge. Their cruelty forced your evolution, and your evolution removed their power. So here you stand, different than before. Trust is no longer what it once was. It is not given. It is earned. It is not assumed. It is tested. Some acts are so cruel they rewrite the very language of trust, and what was once simple now becomes sacred. And while that may feel like a loss, it is also protection. Because now you know the value of trust, and you refuse to spend it cheaply. You don't need to be bitter. You only need to be aware. And awareness, once born, never dies. There comes a point where cruelty stops looking shocking. At first, it shakes people. At first, it makes the air heavy. But repetition dulls the edge. They do it once, and people whisper. They do it again, and people shrug. By the third time, the same crowd who once gasped is silent because cruelty has become familiar. That silence is dangerous. It gives the abuser permission. It turns their actions into routine. And when cruelty becomes routine, outrage is no longer optional. It becomes a necessity. Without outrage, cruelty spreads like mold. It grows in the cracks, hiding until it consumes everything. You saw this pattern. You saw how their small cruelties, tolerated, gave them courage to move toward larger ones. And if you didn't rise in outrage, if you didn't stand against it, it would become law, written into the bones of everyone forced to endure it. You know what it feels like when cruelty gets normalized. It creates an atmosphere where people begin to doubt their own instincts. You tell yourself, maybe it isn't so bad. Maybe they don't mean it. Maybe it's just how things are. That inner bargaining is the proof of damage. Cruelty thrives on people convincing themselves it's tolerable. And they feed on that silence. They grow bolder with every shrug. You learn that outrage isn't simply an emotion, it's survival. Outrage is the scream that refuses to let cruelty blend into the wallpaper. It's the act of pointing at the poison others have learned to sip without question. Without that scream, manipulation and abuse turn into tradition. And tradition is harder to kill than any single act of harm. Psychology makes it clear. Humans adapt quickly, even to what destroys them. It's a defense mechanism. The brain numbs itself to pain when it believes escape is impossible. But numbing is not healing. Numbing is surrender. And manipulators know this. They know if they keep repeating their cruelty, people will eventually stop fighting. That's why outrage matters. Outrage is the rejection of numbness. Outrage is the refusal to let the brain label abuse as normal. When you voice your anger, when you break the silence, you disrupt their entire plan. You show others that adaptation is not the only option, that resistance still exists, and that resistance, no matter how small at first, spreads faster than cruelty if it is given space to grow. You've seen it happen before. The crowd laughed when cruelty was first shown. They dismissed it as entertainment. They said it was just a joke, just a moment. But cruelty, even when dressed as humor, leaves scars. And those scars deepen with every repetition. Soon, people stop noticing the harm at all. They cheer instead of flinch. That's why outrage is necessary. You don't let their joke become culture. You don't let their abuse become tradition. You don't let the abnormal disguise itself as natural. Outrage is what keeps humanity awake when the world is being drugged into apathy. And in toxic groups, your refusal to accept cruelty is always painted as rebellion. They don't call you righteous. They call you difficult. But their anger only proves how much they rely on your silence to thrive. Do not underestimate how much they hate your outrage. They fear it more than your intelligence. They fear it more than your resilience. Because outrage sparks questions, and questions threaten their control. Outrage forces people to look twice, to reconsider, to admit that what they have tolerated is unforgivable. That's why manipulators always label outrage as overreaction. They tell you you're too emotional, too sensitive, too dramatic. These labels are not reflections of you. They are weapons designed to silence you. Because once your outrage spreads, others begin to feel it too. And once people feel it, cruelty is no longer safe. They can endure your silence. They cannot endure your fire. You must also see that outrage isn't always loud. Sometimes outrage is the quiet refusal to laugh at their cruelty. Sometimes it's the calm act of leaving the room instead of staying complicit. Sometimes it's choosing not to repeat their story, not to share their lie, not to enable their act. Outrage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, but even the whisper matters, because the whisper plants seeds. And those seeds grow into movements. What looks like one person refusing to bow becomes an entire group standing taller. That's why your outrage matters, even when it feels small. It disrupts their illusion of unanimous approval. It breaks the image they rely on to convince themselves they can do anything without consequence. Remember this: when cruelty becomes normal, people stop even recognizing it as cruelty. That's the most dangerous stage. People begin to admire it, to copy it, to justify it as strength. But cruelty is not strength. Cruelty is weakness disguised as dominance. And your outrage is the only force that can strip that disguise away. You are not just defending yourself when you resist. You are defending the meaning of humanity itself. Because once cruelty is normalized, society rewrites morality around it. Outrage pulls morality back into focus. Outrage forces people to admit that what they've been swallowing is poison. Outrage is the cure to apathy. They will try to paint you as the villain for refusing their cruelty. They will say you disrupt peace. They will say you divide people. They will say you are intolerant. But peace without justice is slavery. Unity without truth is theater. Tolerance of cruelty is collaboration with evil. Your outrage unmasks their lies. Your outrage tears the curtain down. And yes, it makes you a villain in their eyes. But if being a villain means standing against the normalization of cruelty, then wear the mask proudly. Because villains in their story are often heroes in reality. You must not waste outrage on trivial things. Save it for the moments that matter, the moments where silence becomes betrayal. Outrage is not about noise for the sake of noise. It is about clarity, about refusing to let the abnormal rewrite the definitions of trust, respect, and humanity. You will know when outrage is needed. Your body will feel it. Your chest will burn. Your voice will demand to be used. And when that moment comes, never swallow it. Because your silence becomes their safety. Your outrage becomes their cage. And the world always needs cages for cruelty. The abuser survives not by strength, but by narrative. They weave stories around their cruelty so that when the bruises are visible, when the scars cannot be denied, the crowd still doubts the victim instead of them. Exposure alone doesn't terrify them. Exposure can be spun, explained, excused, softened with lies. What terrifies them is losing control of the story that surrounds exposure. Because without control of the story, their mask cracks. Without the mask, the audience sees the truth without filters. Their greatest fear is not the light. It is silence that refuses to echo their version of events. You've seen how carefully they construct the tale. They plant seeds long before their cruelty is exposed. They call you unstable so that when you resist, people believe their lie. They label you sensitive so that when you speak up, people think you exaggerate. They act charming in public so that when you describe the darkness in private, people think you're bitter. This is their playbook. Their fear is that one day, the story escapes their control and people begin to notice the contradictions. Because once doubt shifts in your favor, their entire kingdom of manipulation collapses in an instant. The psychology is brutal. Abusers know they can withstand anger. They can survive outrage. What they cannot survive is exposure paired with clarity. When people not only see what they've done, but also stop believing their script, they suffocate. It's like pulling the strings out of a puppet master's hands. Without control of the narrative, they are powerless. Their cruelty, once dressed in disguise, is left naked. And naked cruelty cannot charm, it cannot persuade, it cannot convince anyone it is love. That is their nightmare. Not that people see the act, but that people believe the victim's version of the act instead of theirs. You must remember how they react when they feel that control's slipping. They become louder. They tell their story before you can tell yours. They recruit allies. They smear your name to anyone who will listen. They work overtime to plant doubt in the crowd's mind. This desperation is not about truth. It is about timing. Whoever controls the story first often controls the perception. That's why they fight so hard to speak before you do. That's why they panic when your silence lasts too long. Because silence in your hands can be louder than their noise. They know one calm sentence from you can destroy 100 frantic lies from them. You didn't just frighten them by surviving. You frightened them by refusing to let them narrate your survival. They expected you to play into their hands, to lash out so they could call you angry, to crumble so they could call you weak, to beg so they could call you desperate. But you didn't. You held your ground, you stayed patient, and you waited for evidence to speak. That terrified them because patience steals control from liars. The moment you no longer react, they lose the script. The moment you let silence do the work, their noise sounds more suspicious. And that loss of control is unbearable for them. Exposure without narrative is survivable for them. They can twist it, downplay it, manipulate the audience into sympathy. But losing the narrative means exposure multiplies. It spreads without their control. It gains traction without their permission. It paints them into corners they cannot escape. That's why they will do anything to keep the story in their hands. They will lie about lying. They will pretend to confess only to spin the confession into manipulation. They will even act like victims themselves. Anything, as long as they don't lose control of the story. Because the story is their shield, and without it, they are defenseless. Your strength lies in recognizing this. You don't need to scream louder than them. You don't need to argue every detail. You don't need to chase people who believe their lies. You only need to protect the story. Not their story. The real story. Protect it with evidence. Protect it with consistency. Protect it with calmness that makes their hysteria obvious. Because intelligence knows that control of the story doesn't come from volume. It comes from credibility. And credibility cannot be faked for long. Their greatest fear is that the cracks in their story become too wide to cover. Your job is simply to let those cracks breathe. Think of the power you hold now. Every time you remain calm, their story shakes. Every time you refuse to defend lies with more words, their desperation shows. Every time you focus on growth instead of revenge, their mask slips a little further, because the story they tell no longer matches the life you live. And eventually, people stop believing words when evidence contradicts them. That's when their greatest fear comes true. Not just exposure, but exposure they cannot control. Exposure that belongs to you. Exposure that reclaims the story and buries their lies permanently. They will always fear you because you hold the one thing they can't counterfeit: truth lived consistently. They can write their script, but they can't erase the reality of your resilience. They can smear your name, but they can't change the fact that you're still standing. They can tell people you're broken, but they can't stop others from noticing your strength. And every time their story collides with your reality, their fear deepens. Because now they know they've lost the one power they depended on. They've lost the narrative. And once the story belongs to you, nothing can save them. They love to rise. They polish their image, stacking compliments on top of lies, building thrones out of borrowed respect. Every smile, every performance, every carefully staged moment is another brick in their pedestal. They think the height makes them untouchable. They think looking down on others makes them safe. But you've watched long enough to know what they don't admit to themselves. The higher they build, the more fragile their balance becomes. And when reality finally enters the stage, it doesn't tap politely. It strikes. And the fall from that artificial height is never graceful. It's violent. It's humiliating. And it's loud enough for the whole room to hear. They convince themselves that the pedestal is earned. They point at it as proof of superiority. But the truth gnaws at the edges. Deep down, they know it was built on illusions, on half-truths, on the gullibility of those who wanted someone to worship. The psychology is simple. Pedestals aren't built for truth, they're built for projection. People don't admire them for who they are, but for who they pretended to be. And when the pretense shatters, admiration turns into betrayal. Those who once praised them are the first to mock them. Their pedestal becomes their prison. Because the same people who lifted them up are the same ones who will cheer the loudest when they fall. You felt the sting of being dismissed by them. You've heard their condescending words, their sneers from above, their casual cruelty disguised as confidence. They acted like kings while you were treated like the forgotten. But that arrogance was always rented. They mistook the pedestal for permanence. What they didn't see is that the higher they climbed, the more gravity weighted. Reality doesn't care about reputation. It doesn't care about appearances. It doesn't care about how many people bowed in their presence. Reality strikes without apology. And when it does, there's no cushioning the impact. Their pedestal becomes the stage of their collapse. They never plan for the fall. That's what makes it devastating. They think they're immune, so they don't prepare for exposure. They don't prepare for truth. They don't prepare for the moment when silence breaks and shadows are lit. You did. You've been waiting, quietly building yourself in the shadows while they spent their energy on image. That's the difference. They invested in appearances, you invested in substance. So when reality strikes, they lose everything at once, while you rise from the ground steady and ready. Their pedestal was always hollow, while your foundation was built in truth. And truth survives strikes. Illusion does not. Watch how the crowd reacts. People adore idols until they collapse. Then, the same crowd turns vicious. The cheers turn into jeers. The loyalty turns into laughter. And all it took was one hit of reality. That's the cruel part of pedestals. The higher they build, the harder they are mocked when they fall. People don't remember the rise. They remember the crash. They remember the dust, the broken crown, the silence of someone who once acted invincible. That memory burns deeper than all the fake glory combined. And the louder they once shouted, the quieter they become after their fall. You should not envy their rise. Their height is not strength, it's risk. Every inch they climb adds to the cost of their downfall. You must see the wisdom in staying grounded, in building slowly, in refusing the illusions of image. Because while they chase the pedestal, you build walls of resilience. While they construct thrones of glass, you construct fortresses of stone. And when reality moves in, as it always does, you stand while they shatter. They thought they were above gravity. They forgot that gravity never forgets. That's why every pedestal is a trap disguised as power. Their panic begins long before the fall.